First off, I'm so happy. I've been like following Jessamyn West forever, from like computers and libraries to library.net to all of it. She's a library technologist in Orange County, Vermont. She's nationally known speaker, writer, and educator on the issues facing today's libraries. Her blog focuses on libraries and politics. Librarian.net is one of the earliest and longest running librarian websites. She is the author of a book, Without a Net, Librarians Bridging the Digital Divide. She has taught tools for community advocacy for the University of Hawaii Library School and currently works for the Flickr Foundation as a community manager for Flickr Commons. Please help me welcome Jessamyn West.
Hello, thank you. I keep getting that internet connection is unstable message, which it's Vermont in a snowstorm, so we'll see what's going on. But thank you everyone for having me here. I'm gonna share my slides. They will be available afterwards along with my notes, my credits, and links to stuff. I have a tendency to talk a lot about a lot of things, but if there's things you're interested in talking more about, we'll have time afterwards. I'm going to keep half an eye on the chat just because that's me. But if there's stuff in the Google Doc that you want to talk about without saying you want to talk about it, please feel free. So let me make sure slides work. And if you could give me a thumbs up that you can just see my opening slide here. Thank you very much. Great. So, sorry, got to bring the chat up. Bip. Excellent. Really good to see everybody here. As Lisa said and Lorraine said, we're dealing with some weird times out here. And this was the funny long title that we thought summarized everything that we were going to be talking about. How to engage strategically, how to make tactical decisions, how to try to engage positively despite, and then there's the waves hands. So if people don't know me, my name's Jessamyn. I've been sort of an internet person and a librarian person for since the 90s. I'm a rural librarian, so I live in central Vermont, and I've been helping people basically use software in public libraries since there's been software. I'm not a media librarian per se. My library is one that just has a huge collection of DVDs, and that's kind of it. We have no canopy, no hoopla, no anything else, basically. So I can only imagine the sea change that you're dealing with in media archiving stuff, because I just see what I've been dealing with just trying to help people with their phones for the last 15 years. It is wild. So even in less tough times, I think that's a complicated job, not for the faint of heart. This slide just has a capsule description of me, including some of the things that have to do with my identity, including work stuff and not work stuff. So at the Flickr Foundation, we do digital image preservation, storage, and sharing, and I'm the community engagement person, which is mostly like helping people get along, interact with each other, that kind of thing. It's an interesting, nebulous topic. I love technology. I'm an elected official, meaning I'm a justice of the peace in my small town, which maybe you know from Andy Griffith, but what it really means is I get to marry people and serve on some pretty important boards, including abatement and tax appraisal reassessment, that kind of stuff. It's very snores, but it's important, and also it's elected, so I do sort of pay attention. Oh, and we run the elections. Sorry, that's the important part of that story. I'm just a middle-aged white lady who has some pretty middle-of-the-road identities. I'm also Jewish, though, which means sometimes these things that come up, especially as people have been talking about Israel and Palestine, and I live in a town where nobody really understands kind of Jewish identity. There's like 7 of us in a town of 4,500 people. It's a big deal. And Antifa, I'm pretty much in charge of that, as you probably know. So if I don't see you at the meetings, I need you to sort of step up. But it's a joke, right? Because Antifa is a completely decentralized, unstructured resistance organization, and everybody can say that they're part of it. So I mention all of this sort of identity stuff because in these stupid times, one of the hallmarks, as our country is undergoing this brutal dismantling of many pieces of the social safety net and apparently the human decency requirement for living in a society, one of those hallmarks is that it's become more difficult than usual to not have your identity. And this is just for lack of a better word, right? Kind of an umbrella term. It could be racial, it could be religion, it could be gender, it could be country of origin, it could be a sexual preference, it could be a number of other things, are becoming part of the discussion in and around the workplace, in addition to just cultural spaces generally. We've seen people basically be assaulted by government goons when they're at work. We've seen people lose their jobs because of their personally held beliefs, often which they didn't bring to work whatsoever, and people singled out because of their identity factors, which had absolutely nothing to do with their jobs. So it was feminist Carol Hanisch, and she popularized the term "the personal is political" in 1969, which is about how long I've been on the planet, talking about how topics that had maybe been previously thought of as private matters, and at the time this was stuff like housework, this was stuff like abortion and, you know, family planning, I think, structures of oppression at the time weren't actually private matters, but in fact they were issues that were institutionalized, they were built into the political structure, and would need political as well as other solutions. Which is to say, we do have right now an egregious intrusion of politics into our home lives and our work lives. Some people much more than others, but also in some ways we always have. And so this is especially true of librarians or library workers or archivists, or I never stand on the L word, people who were involved in preserving and sharing cultural heritage, who have often been at the forefront of political change and advocating for social justice and equity. So when I was in library school back in the 90s, I read this book, the red one, Revolting Librarians, which had essays from a lot of librarians who were working for social change. And this was at a time when this book was written in 1973, before women could own credit cards. And abortion was essentially illegal, almost illegal. And interracial marriage had only been legal nationwide for about 5 years, thanks to Loving versus Virginia. There was an interesting anecdote from yesterday, which is to say the Supreme Court just declined to hear a case about equal marriage in the United States, and people were interested in that because the Supreme Court has not been amazing lately, is my understatement. And one of the reasons people, you know, crabby internet people posited is that Clarence Thomas was a little bit worried they might then try to undo Loving versus Virginia, which is kind of like a uneasy joke, but also we do see a lot of self-interest going on in people in positions of power and the thing that they do. So Revolting Librarians, I read when it was already an old book in the 90s, and it inspired me to be politically engaged. Not just at home, where I was always politically engaged. Like my grandmother was a socialist in New York fighting for union stuff, and my uncle is a fairly well-known West Coast activist trying to get Leonard Peltier out of jail forever. But also at work, because it turns out with librarianship, you can have these opinions and also in some ways, in sometimes, have your job. I'm aware not everybody is as fortunate to be able to bring their politics to work. And mostly I'm not going to talk about our enduring library values, archivist values, cultural heritage preservation and sharing values, because I assume you know that. But it's going to be a little bit. So this was going to be a very different talk before last Tuesday. I have been thinking about it since we talked about it several months ago, and at the time things were bleak and looking like they were only going to get uh, in that direction.
Blacker.
And excuse me. And it's also a slightly different talk than it was going to be before Sunday night. So I apologize for some of the slapdash nature of this. The suggestions I'll be making won't be totally different. The context probably will be. And speaking of Virginia, which we were thinking of in terms of Virginia versus Loving, they just elected Abigail Spanberger as governor, and she's a Democrat, and she ran on a very specifically anti-Doge platform and openly opposed her opponent's transphobia, which she which they brought to the they brought to the race, right? In fact, one of the things that's pretty interesting about last Tuesday is most of the transphobes in major elections, people who thought that they were going to be able to use their transphobia as a wedge issue in order to court conservative voters, most of them lost. This is not to say that everything's great and we're not currently living under a kleptocracy, which resembles fascism in a lot of ways, just that we're getting a very strong vibe that maybe a real lot of people don't actually like that. So this was my framing of last week, and I still wanted to share it because this is honestly where my heart is. Like many library people, I find utility in the words of others, especially lately in poetry. And to be honest, I barely read poetry at all before probably 2020, and I got to spend a lot more time at home with books and trying to feel some things, and was trying to avoid kind of the cheap dopamine hit of social media, despite the fact that there's nothing wrong with that. And this is a poem by Wendell Berry, who is one of my favorite poets and essayists. And it's about marriage and farming and a little bit about religion. But honestly, to me, it's about rising to the current moment. And I will explain. We've always had a professional culture that's been built on openness and sharing. And sorry, I'm going to open the chat a little bit more. It occurred to me. Ba, ba, ba. Yes, physical media for life. Thank you. Openness and sharing. And it's actually a really difficult thing to move forward operating as if sharing might not be optimal and as if openness could potentially be a liability. So I know one of the things that's marked my time in the last couple months is other people sure do have a lot of advice. And one of the things I think people can do when they're feeling like they can't do anything is advise. It's a caring action, I think. It comes from a good place. But it can sometimes not work in individual contexts. I think a little bit about the No Kings protests. And if you spent time on social media, you get a lot of sort of aggressive opinions like, don't bring your kids, leave your cell phone at home, write your lawyer's name on your arm. And there's nothing wrong with that advice, and it certainly works in certain specific contexts. But one of the things that I think is very complicated about this current moment is not everyone has the same threat model and is at the same level of risk for their participation. My town protest was just a big thing with a lot of inflatable axolotls, and the only thing the cops did was pulled over a jerk who drove too close to the people on the side of the road. Way to go, right? So I've been asked a little bit to give some advice, but to also be brief, which I will, and to make some suggestions. But if people have other suggestions as I kind of zip through a couple things here, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I think it's a nice chat using group, so may as well, and there'll be time for questions afterwards. And if you don't feel okay associating your name with your comments, the Google document is fine. And I think Lisa and Lorraine are going to be looking at this. So we really are all in this together, but just maybe not in the same way. And the important part of this poem to me is the one at the end: be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction, practice resurrection, which is interesting for me as a Jew because we don't, that's not our thing, but you know, I understand the vibe of it. And so to speak of openness at a personal level, we're actually all people first and foremost, and employees second. If you're in a situation where you don't feel safe from the government or your coworkers, I have some friends at Columbia, they do not feel that Columbia has their back right now. It's okay to be more circumspect. It's okay to use fewer of your personal details online. It's okay to represent your institution without necessarily pinning your name to anything, because occasionally, depending on what you're doing at work, that can paint a target on your back, and you do not have to do that. And I think of these specific pieces of advice. Understand how you look online. Think about your own risk and threat model. Make some tactical determinations personally, not taking other people's word for it, about whether your workplace has your back, and thinking about if you have other colleagues, maybe in your larger workplace or maybe just on the larger internet, who do. And I'm thinking about this not just like, oh, there might be unsupportive human eyeballs looking at stuff you may say or do online, or that your work says or does about you, but also the weird space where we have to think about AI bots could be ingesting what you say and, you know, keeping track in big databases. Like, I'm not a big fear of the panopticon person, but I do think it's important to know that security through obscurity, which I think is how a lot of us have, in many cases, operated in our small Discord chat rooms, or, you know, on Mastodon, or in places where we may be interacting our workplace Slack, and we think that's not public. It may not be public in kind of a general sense as we understand it, but that doesn't mean there may not be sort of AI bots who are ingesting that stuff, and it may show up in weird ways at the end. And one of the other things is, I think for some of us, the community of the workplace may have changed and may need some reevaluating. In the same way, you should be suspicious, just in general, about any boss who tells you that your work colleagues are like a large family. You know, they might be, but that's your business. You may have to look for a community in a different subset, as I said, and maybe even outside of your workplace. If you are in a negative space or confronted with unworkable work situations, passive sabotage is something I do not mention lightly. And it's its own entire topic, and you may know if this happens to you. There's a link at the end of these slides to a nice passive sabotage field manual that the CIA made available. It's kind of interesting. We'd be getting tips from the CIA, but it's mostly just ways to not comply in advance with bad directives. This doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't have to require any big spy skills or even bravery, honestly. Just things like play a little dumb if Doge or the equivalent wants to come into your office and lose your keys for 10 minutes, or act confused about where your stuff is. It could also be like, make people explain the new dumb anti-DEI rule a few more times before you take any action, and make sure you have things in writing and everybody's signed off on it. Just a little, you know, a little Mr. Bean about everything. But buy time, slow the workplace. I'm not saying everybody should be doing this. I'm just saying it's a tactic that's available to you and is not particularly risky, I guess, as a thing. There's a nice thing in the chat: One Battle After Another has some great examples, and apparently also is a great film. I know nothing about this, so I'm pretty excited about it. So things like, maybe you have to remove materials from your collection. Maybe there's another place people could access those materials. This is a Books Unbanned project where 6 very large public libraries in the United States all have gotten together to offer library cards to young people, usually 25 and under, where books that have specifically been challenged or banned are available to them as if it were their own library via Libby/Overdrive. It's actually an amazing program. And there's probably some film equivalent, and I would be interested to know more about it, but sort of worth thinking about. Maybe you could tell them. One of the things, just kind of as an aside, when we were dealing with the United States, the USA Patriot Act, right, which was the thing that was like, John Ashcroft was being a jerk and was like, there's a new law, businesses may have to make their records available to people who show up with a warrant. And like, that's crummy. But the big part about the USA Patriot Act that was so creepy was the fact that there was a gag order associated with it. And so if you got one of these national security letters, you were not allowed to talk about it. And so as a result, it was secrecy and a whole bunch of menacing threats. In fact, there weren't very many national security letters that were sent out, some of which were sort of pushed back against. But the gag order meant you couldn't talk to anybody about it besides your lawyer. And it became like this sort of culture of fear situation. And eventually 4 librarians from Connecticut were the people who challenged this, and it got struck down, and now we don't have the stupid gag order. So not everybody can have a legal solution, but it is sort of worth knowing what is available to you. And maybe you're not really comfortable or confident using tools which enhance your privacy at work. Tools people have talked about, maybe like Signal or Tor, or having a VPN. There are some really friendly people who would be happy to teach you. The Library Freedom Institute has a great program. It is free. Applications are open through December 10th, and you will come out of there knowing significantly more in a supportive learning environment with other library archivist types. I highly recommend it, and even if maybe a class isn't for you, their resources are really excellent and they're recommended. And so along those same lines, library workers, archivists, other cultural heritage workers especially, but anyone really, can make it clear that they're in the group that Mr. Rogers calls the helpers, for lack of a better word. Sometimes this can be just as little as saying, we see what's happening and we see you. So there was this concept of samizdat. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but like kind of ways of getting the word out under communism in the Soviet Union, and people would make little print materials or even records. There's this great story about how people made LP records out of old X-ray film that are now like highly collectible hipster nonsense. But like what they were trying to do was spread the word in ways that they were allowed to spread the word, or not even allowed to, but they could sort of do it on the down low. And there's a lot of that. Not the same, obviously, because we're not living under communism. It's different, but familiarizing yourself with what's available now. And I have a couple links to some stuff, and using your space, because many of us have access to space, though not all, to build community, all sorts of community. Having people come in just to do anything and to be in the presence of other people is, we have real winter here. So it's a huge thing here to have a place to go when it's snowy outside, when you'd just be sitting at home making more soup and feeling isolated. And thinking about even just using the space in order to build that community, and finding other organizations. This is a just standard librarian thing. Maybe you can talk about a thing that your partner organization can't talk about because of different restrictions in their workplace, or vice versa. Maybe they can talk about a thing and you can kind of sneak them information. Storytelling is probably the hugest thing you will probably hear about in every talk over the next 3 days, but using your storytelling to highlight stories which should be told and who should be told about in ways that not only talk about actually what's boots on the ground happening, but also inspired joy. I cannot tell you enough how more joy people need in their lives, and how much those emotions can encourage people to do the difficult thing. So one of my little acts of sort of local resistance has been, we have a highway overpass in my town, and we go there to do overpass protests, right? We wave American flags because it's my flag too, right? And we have a huge No Kings banner. And occasionally people driving under will give us the finger, which I don't love, but like more often, like 50-1 more often, they honk, they wave, they blink, they give us the peace sign, and it's incredibly encouraging. And we do it every Sunday, and that helps me do Monday through Saturday, right? Whatever those things are, a library or an archive or a cultural heritage organization, putting out useful information in a place where people can see it is a more powerful stance than it may feel like. It shows that people in positions of power care. And information like these red cards, which are freely available online, or you can order them in bulk if you don't want to print them, which provide a capsule listing of people's rights with regard to the police in 20 languages. Everyone's rights, everyone in America's rights. And it's good for people to know them. And they're union made, you may notice, which is also kind of cool. But they're just freely available on the internet. Whenever I see a library that makes these available, I know that's a library that knows what's going on and maybe isn't afraid to get out in front of it a little bit. And when I was talking about zines, this is a little upside down, right side up. But information like who to call if ICE is menacing your community, and then what to do. These are just one-page, tiny zines with local information. This one happens to be about Chicago, but there's ones that are available for many 20, 30 locations around the United States. Or you can even make up your own. This is basically, you print it out on a sheet of paper, you cut it with the scissors, you fold it, and suddenly you've got something you can hand to people that says, I see you and I see what you're up against, and maybe this might help because I work in information resources. So not all of these shareable type things can be right out there on the bulletin board or cross-posted to social media, but there are ways to show that the library is a resource, and maybe for a little bit more than just media. Lisa's got a thing in the chat, the zine your research, talking about zines as radical communication. Absolutely worth taking a look. And then there's the philosophical aspect to this that I can't speak to as well as the other ways. I shoot my mouth off a lot. I have certain levels of privilege which protect me, but I'm not brave. It's important for me to know that about myself. One of the hardest things about all of this is realizing that while we are all sort of in this together, as I said earlier, many of us have different risk profiles, different personal concerns, different areas of vulnerability. We're seeing white women going out and yelling at ICE and actually making them go away sometimes because they're more protected. We're seeing people suing the government for their own rights or because their rights have been besmirched, and they win sometimes. Maybe you're the person who can help, or maybe you're the person who needs to be helped, and give a little thought to that before you need to be thinking about it. Think about how far is too far. Think about your relative privilege compared to your colleagues. And honestly, doing something, anything at all, will feel better than doing nothing. Not everybody can destroy the railroads, as is shown in this picture. And also all my image credits are at the end too, in case you're curious. They're mostly from Flickr comments, which is sort of fun to be able to do. So early on, in January or February, post-election and inauguration, I was living alone in the wintertime, watching a lot of media to keep me occupied and to help the days pass. I plowed through Foyle's War like it was my job. I don't know if anybody else has followed along with this show, but if you haven't seen it, it's about a man who works for the police while the World War starts, goes on, and ends in a coastal town in Britain. He's a straightforward, no nonsense guy. He's good at his job. He manages to keep it together when other people don't. The meta message of the show, which I sort of like, is how often they feel like the bad guy is a known enemy, like the Nazis, and they're sure like the Nazi did it. But often it turns out that the real culprit is someone who seems like one of us right up until they don't. And so someone asked Foyle, this is a picture of him, at one point in the show, how they were meant to go on in the face of all the awfulness that they were dealing with, all the bombing and all the uncertainty and all of the new rules and the rationing and whatever. And his reply has become part of my reply to people when they ask how it's going. You have to ask is often what I say, but it's a little too sassy. Because I get up every day and I go to work. I see and support my friends and neighbors. I keep an eye on the news that might affect me and mine, including at the library. I try not to pay too close attention to what is that awful man or woman done now. I'm not a person in recovery, but I very much understand the vibe of this kind of message. And as of October, that was what I'd say, and it would have been sort of where I'd end this this talk in kind of on a bleak but honest note. You know, day by day, hope we get through it. But November, in some ways, has made me feel a different sort of thing. Sort of wrapping up here, but we saw a lot of different things happening last Tuesday. It's sort of surprising it's only been a week. And here's a short list of the major points. It wasn't just Zoran winning in New York City, although that was cool. People said no to Moms for Liberty, the people who have really been trying to ban books and other media in school libraries. In every contested race, Moms for Liberty were in. So they were in some non-contested races, but in every contested race, they lost. Every single one. Eric Dussault is the transgender mayor of Downingtown, Pennsylvania, a small town outside of Philly, and she is amazing. 14 states now have female governors, although not all of them are maybe what I would consider playing for my team, but still. Colorado decided to tax the rich in order to feed kids at schools in a project and a program that Massachusetts had already done, and it's going fine. California undid some of the gerrymandering that California had already done. So good news, kind of. And like I said, Moms for Liberty, they lost every single one of their contested races. And even before last Tuesday, I was getting caught up in the energy of possibility. I follow a political philosopher named Olufemi Otaiwo on social media. And one day he was re-skeeting, which I guess is what you do on Blue Sky, some local news, something that felt like maybe it was a sign that things might be going in a different, better direction. And it came with a message. And that message is one that he's repeated whenever there's more good news. He said this, and I say it to myself when good things happen, as they sometimes do, because honestly, I don't know what will happen, but I do have some ideas, and I trust my community, and I trust that we have ways to help. And so as one of the organizers from Protect Rogers Park, which is a place in Chicago that's dealing with some pretty crappy ICE behavior right now, but they're banding together as neighbors to work on it. Everyone can do something, and that something will matter. So thank you very much. If people have questions or things that they want to talk about, I think we have a little bit of extra time. My slides will be available. They'll send a link out a little bit later, and I really thank you for your attention and engagement. And this is my credits and some resources. Some of them got dropped in the chat, but there's also a page with a link to that poem that I love, and a couple other things that I think you'll probably like.
This is absolutely wonderful. Folks, I would be interested in hearing any thoughts you have. Jessamyn, I'd never known about